Cheers, everybody.
There's a little bubbly in our glass here. I find Bubbles is the best cheese wine across all cheeses. So if you have a diversified board like we have tonight, Bubbles will be the safest thing across all of the cheeses. But we're drinking a few other things too, and we'll have some fun with that. But now let me turn us over to Carrie to get us started.
Okay, so we're gonna do a quick and dirty sort of explanation of cheese making. It can be super complicated as well as pretty simple. But every time we see a cheesemaker as a shop, I always ask them to go over the cheese making process because it actually is a fair amount of steps and I get them mixed up. So I just wanted to go through it really quickly today. There's definitely so much more we could talk about, but just so we're all on the same page. Before I start though, I just wanted to make sure everyone was gonna have a bite of something.
Oh, that's a good idea.
Yeah, so you could start with wherever you want. We're gonna start with the Florey's truckle, which is what you can see Dad is cutting up right here. That's the first one we're gonna talk about today. That's the first one on your menu. So it's this guy right here. I just wanna make sure that as I talk, you feel free to snack because that's part of this whole thing. Okay, so I'm gonna show you, you may have gotten this PDF in your email about cheese making, but we're gonna go through it as well on slides on the screen. So if you could put up the first slide about cheese making. So, need to start with milk. The milk goes into some sort of vat. It's heated. Acid is added to the milk to help the milk coagulate. That's so that the whey and the curds can separate. Next slide. Okay, so you have the curds, and now what do you do with them as you have basically one big curd? The cheesemaker cuts the curds to help the whey drain out even more and to make them the right size. Then the curds are cooked a little bit more to make them a little bit firmer, as well as help the whey drain out. And then after they're cooked for a certain amount of time, the whey is completely drained. Next slide. Then whey is drained, got a bunch of curds hanging out, salt the curds. When you have your salty curds, then you can put them into forms. So cheesemakers use forms of all different sizes and shapes. We can have something really small, like this guy, like your little cremant, or we can have an 80-pound wheel of Gruyere. Then lastly, I'm so sorry, I'm flipping around a little bit. Then we have, after your cheeses are formed, we are pressing them and aging them. Most cheesemakers are really clear that aging is a very important step and ingredient in cheesemaking.
So let me jump in here too. Another important ingredient that doesn't get talked about is magic. I think that I think of the magic of fermentation as a key to all this. We can analyze chemically what's going on here and have a pretty good idea of what's happening. But even with these small number of ingredients, milk, salt, bacteria, pressing, aging, and some heat, wheel to wheel, season to season, cheeses will vary. And that's what's so interesting. They're very, yes, we do have industrial scale production, and that cheese flavor is consistent, but I would also suggest that it's pretty bland. And this is why we're so eager to keep these cheesemakers going and get that interesting kick. I saw a quick question. This was, we're talking about a cheddar here. We're starting with cheddar.
Yes.
Florey's truckle is a cheddar.
So
sorry, back to you, Carrie.
Yeah, we wanted to start with Florey's truckle because it is a cheddar. It is the first one on your menu, and we wanted to start with cheddar because it is one of the best known cheese types in this country. So for Florey's truckle, I'd love you to take a bite as I'm talking about it. With all of these cheeses, I'm going to tell you what the cheese is, but then we're going to go into something cool about the cheese style itself, and then we'll come back and talk about what the cheese actually is. So Florey's truckle, a cow's milk cheddar from Missouri. Dad is is digging in already. You can see that this is what it's shaped like in a full wheel. So cheddaring, what is that? Cheddar gets its name from this process called cheddaring. Most cheddar it does go through this process of cheddaring, but it technically doesn't have to. But that is where it got its name, from this process of cheddaring. So we're actually going to show you a couple clips to go through the process. Before I show you those, I do want to say cheese people are not the best at technology. So this video is a little bit shaky. There's a couple words on it, but just you can read them or ignore them. I'm going to explain it as we go. So can we play the first clip? All right, so this cheesemaker has his curds and his whey all separated, as you can see. So what they're doing now is they're pushing the curds to both sides of this rectangular tank in order to get the whey out of the curds. They want to start draining the curds so that we can start getting the right texture and flavor. So the point of cheddaring is for the texture and the flavor. The whey needs to be squeezed out enough so we can get a firm enough cheese. And also the acidity of the cheddar is very important. Acidity makes the cheese sharp or not sharp. All right, can you play the next clip? So this cheesemaker is now cutting those curds into rectangles. Those rectangles are kind of, I would like a little more of a poetic name for these, but they're called curd mats. So as you can see, the curd is already becoming a little bit firmer as the whey is draining out from the weight of its own weight of the curd. You can see that he's starting to flip the curd mats, and that's to help the whey come out, but it's also to control that acidification. All right, we can see the next clip.
Can I jump in here just for one quick second? So it is this process that is the classic idea of cheddaring. That's the name for this process.
Yeah.
Please.
So you can see what they're doing right now is building up the curd mats. That is, again, to help push more and more whey out from the curd mats, as well as to control the acidity. When the curd mats are in a higher pile, it's warmer in there, so that it's not quite as acidic as when the curd mats are just a couple high, then it's cooler and the acidity grows. On here, you can see the whey being pressed out really quickly, and you can see the final texture that they're going for. So on one side, you see the first very curdy curd mats, and then on the other side, you see much smoother. What they're trying to do is balance that texture, the whey coming out of it, with the acidity. If the acidity is rising too quickly, the cheese is going to be too sharp before the texture is ready. So that's that up and down that the cheesemakers are playing with, why they sometimes stack it high, sometimes stack it low, to try to keep that balance in there. So our final clip, after they've done all this work, they're going to re-shred the curd mats, which is just looks like they're going backwards. But what they're doing here is they're trying to make sure the curds on the cheese are going to be exactly the right size for the final product. So they also need to mix in the salt. So what they're doing here is they have the right texture of the curd mats, then they're going to chop them up again in this wood chipper looking implement. And then the curds will be the right size and the right texture and the right acidity and have the right amount of salt. So then at that point, they're going to go into the molds. So that is the cheddaring process that much cheddar goes through to get that classic cheddary texture and flavor. So now we're going to talk a little bit more about Florey's truckle itself. Dad, you want to tell us a little bit more about this crazy looking wheel?
Right, let me pull that over again. So this is Clothbound. That's another part of the cheddar process, or the cheese making process. I said many cheeses use a cloth binding instead of wax or instead of plastic. It is the choice of a cheese maker to do that, and it's a very traditional method. Many of the great cheddars of England use that method, and it's sort of a sign of pedigree. It allows moisture and air to flow out. The tricky thing about cloth binding is that it also allows molds to go in, which helps flavor the cheese, but occasionally it can create a little issue inside.
Sometimes the issues are delicious.
Sometimes the issues are delicious.
Just want to put that in there.
Right. One more thing about this guy is this is what a truckle looks like. So I've forgotten, or I haven't really bothered to find out why a truckle as opposed to a wheel. You will find cheddars in various shapes. This particular cheesemaker chose this shape. Here is a working piece of Flory's truckle. You can see we've cut it in half, and that's how we go at it. So
yeah, so let's taste. I hope you guys have been tasting throughout. Dad, I know you've been tasting throughout.
Yeah,
tell me about it. What do you think it tastes like? What do you think it should pair with?
Well, first you get that texture, that classic crumbly. This is what, about
12 months.
12 months old.
12 months old.
If you crumble it in your fingers, you'll get a little sense of the curds that Curie was talking about. In other words, they cut them, but not completely finely, and it breaks apart in kind of a curd structure. First of all, there's a grassy flavor that you get there.
Totally. I think this is a good example of clothbound cheddar in that it's like a little grassy, a little earthy. This is a little bit sweet as well, but it's a really complex cheddar. Lots of interesting things going on, partly because of the clothbound.
I get a bit of caramel at the back end of this. It's not tremendously salty, and it's not particularly aggressive in that cheddar tang, but I think that also allows some of these more subtle flavors to come through. Oftentimes cheddar can be so acidically sharp that that's what dominates your mouth and almost lights your mouth on fire. Interestingly,
I do want to quickly put in that if you completely disagree with what we taste, that is cool. Whatever you taste is right, because it's so personal and we'd love to hear about it. Do you think we should go to Kevin to see if there's any questions?
Yes, let me put my earplug in here. Kevin, any specific questions we should address at this point?
Yeah, one is, for those who might be interested in learning to make our own cheese at home, what resources could you recommend?
We do have some ideas for that. Could I put that on hold, because that gets to be specific contact information. It will vary somewhat geographically, but also there are good sources that can ship you supplies, the rennet, the cheese making, the molds, the cheese making instructions.
Can I also interrupt one second?
Please, yeah.
So the most successful cheese I've ever made at home is ricotta. I tried making mozzarella. It was a huge mess, huge disaster. I'm sure some of you would be a lot more successful than I was, but ricotta has always been very successful for me, and I think it's a great place to start. My favorite ricotta recipe is off of a website called Smitten Kitchen. I think you can really, you can follow the recipe and it'll be great, but if you mess something up, I still think it'll be awesome. So Smitten Kitchen, ricotta, I think is an awesome place to start.
I hope everybody is eating away. I think get a little protein, get a little energy to get us through this whole
We're not going on a hike, Dad.
All right.
Okay.
Should we move along? I think we better.
Let's go on to Gruyere. All right. So.
Oh, you know what I forgot to mention? We opened this crazy orange wine from Austria. We just happen to be in love with this thing. It's called Mineclang. And I think when the lighting, let's see.
It's okay.
Anyway, so that's great orange color. A bit of fruit in here.
Goes great with cheddar, but orange wine is awesome for so many cheeses. Just briefly, orange wine is white wine with the skins left on the juice a little bit longer. It's not made of oranges, even though a lot of orange wine does kind of taste like oranges. So that could definitely go with our current cheese or our next cheese, which we are moving on to Alpine cheeses, the best known being Gruyere. Dad, do you want to give us a little Gruyere intro here?
So this category is pressed cooked cheeses. And that means that the milk is warm throughout most of the cheese making process. Again, this is one of the ingredients or one of the parts of cheese making that the cheesemaker can vary depending on the cheese he's making, where he's applying heat, how much heat, and how long. In the Gruyere, which is a very, very smooth texture, and this is the major characteristic of these cheeses, this very luxurious, creamy thing, because they cut the curds very finely and they press the cheeses very hard so that you don't get any sort of crumbling when you break it. And
unlike the cheddar where you could kind of see a little curd.
That's right. So we've moved from cheddars to pressed cooked cheeses, and take it away from there, Carrie.
All right, so this is Gruyere 1655, a cow's milk Alpine cheese. Alpine cheese is a phrase we throw around a lot at the shop. Basically, it means cheeses that are made in the same style that people used hundreds of years ago when they were making cheese actually in the Alps. So people who had cows would bring their cows up into the Alps for the summer, cooler breezes, a little bit more grass and flowers and things like that. So you can kind of see the mountainside here, very lush and green. And so most people don't do that anymore. So now we're just using similar techniques to make Alpine cheese. I should say the correct term is Alpine style cheese, because there are certainly still cheeses made this way. If you come across a Gruyere that has d'Alpage as a part of the name, that is an Alpine Gruyere. We don't have that for you today, but we still have an awesome Gruyere for you. One of the coolest parts of working in a cheese shop is being able to cut giant wheels of cheese, and this is one of them. So Gruyere tends to be about 2.5 feet, which, what would you say, Dad? That's like...
From there, yeah, that's about right. Yep.
Kind of like
yeah.
up here. And so they're big, and they're to 70 to 80 pounds. So lifting that thing is a good lift for the day. You get to eat lots of cheese after that one. So one of the cool things here is I was wondering why these wheels are so huge when it's a lot easier to carry around, cheeses like this that are a lot smaller. So the reason they made them so big is because often these herdsmen were up in the mountains alone. So they would milk all their cows, they would take the milk into their hut and leave it, wait for the afternoon milking, do it again. Then they were able to fill one giant mold instead of having to worry about tons of little molds to make lots of little cheeses. So it's also a lot easier to wash and care for and flip one wheel as opposed to many wheels.
I also have a theory, and you've seen a couple of pictures flash up on the screen, that the 80-pound wheel was sort of a maximum that one man could carry down the mountain on these tiny steep trails, so that if you got past that, you better be really big and strong. But an 80-pound wheel is about what a man could carry efficiently downhill.
Absolutely. At the cheese shop one day, we had a giant argument about this. So I ended up emailing someone else in the cheese industry. Dad ended up being right, which was terrible, but so it goes. So that is actually how they got these giant wheels down the mountains. The pads are too rocky and small. So if you can just put up the picture of the sort of Gruyere holder, the cacolet, that would be awesome. Okay, so this is really what they use to carry these 80-pound wheels down an Alp. I have trouble doing that with a backpack with water bottles. So this is what they used to bring them down the Alps. Since it's one guy, it's a lot easier to just carry one giant wheel than a lot of small wheels. So our Gruyere here, Gruyere 1655, is named for the first time that they've found the Gruyere recipe in print that is pretty much the Gruyere we have today. It is also a collaboration, just like the Fleury's truffle was, aged in one place after it's made in another. That's usually how Alpine cheeses work in Switzerland, because that is two very distinct jobs there that people go to school for years for. So we have a cheesemaker and an affineur, or cheese ager. So what do you taste? Like, what's a classic taste in
let's
Gruyere?
get in here and taste this. This cheese defines the word nutty, I believe. And I'm thinking walnuts primarily for me, a little bit of hazelnut, but that is often the primary descriptor of the flavors of Alpine cheeses.
Yeah, for
and this
sure.
guy shows it beautifully. What else are you getting, Carrie?
I would say that another characteristic of Alpine cheese is a caramelized onion quality. This one, I would say, doesn't have it as strong as some of the others. That's one thing that depends wheel to wheel, which is one reason why artisanal cheese is so fun. This particular wheel, not super oniony, but I definitely get a little caramelized onion sweetness in there for sure.
I'm going to just put a little bit of the jam on this one too. I hope everybody has that little jar of jam from one of our favorite jam makers. She's a Vermonter. Can you tell us about V. Smiley, Carrie, for just a second while I eat this thing?
Yeah, V. Smiley is an awesome producer to work with. She makes really cool flavors, and I haven't found one yet I haven't loved. So the cool thing about her jam is she's growing most of the fruit on her own farm in Vermont, and instead of sugar, she uses honey. She did that for health reasons, but also just for delicious flavor. She's using honey from her neighbor, and there is like citrus in here, and so that isn't from Vermont, of course, but most of the fruit used in her very creatively flavored jams are from her own farm, which is pretty cool.
Guys, I had a quick question.
So moving on to Cremant.
Hang on for one quick sec. Yeah.
Question.
Is there any sort of Gruyere or Swiss cheese question?
Actually, we're getting a number of questions in the question and answer section about, can you eat the rind? And if so, if you can eat the rind, generally what kinds of rinds can you eat and what can't you eat?
So technically, this is a question that we get all the time at the shop. It's a great question to ask. Technically, you can eat any rind that's not cloth, wax, plastic,
or
foil, paper, I mean, you could technically eat paper if you wanted to. So other than those materials, you can eat pretty much any rind. I always recommend that people taste the rind and then decide if they like it or not. The Gruyere rind for me, way too hard. The Cremant, which is going to be our next cheese, definitely eat the rind on that. The Oma, which is coming up farther in our tasting, that has an awesome rind as well. Sometimes it has great flavor.
A good example too of rind that you might not want to eat, when we get the cloth-bound Fleury's like this, you probably don't want to eat that, but you peel off the cloth and you're left with a much more appealing looking rind. I don't know if this is, can I get that over here for a moment? Too much glare. Let me see if I can change. Oh yeah.
Oh yeah, right there.
And it's a very, thank you, that's great. Very thin rind, and again, so eat right through it.
If you want to.
I agree with Kiri that no rind will really hurt you. Even the foil, that'll just get stuck in your teeth, as will the cloth binding. But
we're not recommending you eat foil or cloth.
Or the wax off the Gouda, but you always can try it. And of course, the Italians are famous for making sure that they save the rinds of all their Parmigiano to cook with. And you can do that with almost any other cheese as well. All righty.
All right. What else? Another question?
Yeah, we actually had some questions about it being cloth bound. One person asked, what's the difference between the cloth bound cheddar and the cheap cheddar you buy sliced at the grocery store. And then we had some other folks asking what kind of cloth is used, why is it called Clothbound? So just if you can talk a little bit more about the cloth binding process.
I'll start with the cloth.
Yeah, why don't you take it away?
Okay, so the cloth is generally muslin. And was it why was Clothbound? Sorry, I lost it. Was it why is it Clothbound? I'm sorry, Kevin.
Yes, why is it Clothbound?
Okay, so the cloth allows a lot more air movement with the cheese. So when a cheese is sitting in a cellar or a cave, there's a lot of cool things happening as all the cheeses are sitting together. So when it is bound in cloth, there's a lot more movement of air into and out of the cheese. So that kind of can create a more interesting flavor, as opposed to when cheddar or any cheese is aged completely cryovac in plastic. There's no air movement then. And no moisture loss. So the cheese is going to taste exactly like itself as soon as it goes into the plastic. Whereas something like Fleury's Truckle or other cloth-bound cheeses develop flavor over time. They become more interesting the longer they sit in the cellar or the cave or wherever the cheese is being aged. And yeah, they're just using like a cotton muslin. You want to do difference between cloth-bound and sliced cheddar?
Oh, I think you covered it a bit. I think the cloth binding is also trickier to handle. So when you're going to industrial scale cheese production, you don't want those kind of variables in your system. And that's where you'll go to typically a cryovac cheese management and a very sterile environment.
And less weight loss.
Right, and it produces a very standard and predictable cheddar, which is a useful thing, of course, but that's not why we're here. We're here to find these guys and then help them keep going. So
and also have an interesting tasting cheese.
Oh, that's excuse me. Yes, that's the main thing. Yes. What was was there anything else that we wanted to cover there? I'm sorry.
Any other questions, Kevin, that you want us to hit?
There's one question here that is the top voted question that says, how do you rub the belly of the cow for creamy cheese?
With a great deal of love.
I think that's true of many things. And with that, should we move on to Cremant?
Move on.
Okay, Cremant, cream of Vermont. What do you got for us, Dad? What is it?
All righty. So this is our example of a bloomy rinded cheese. This is the type of rind that is made most famous by Camembert and Brie. So Carrie can get into the technical side of that, but it's typically creates a nice skin, and the cheeses are typically quite creamy and soft inside. And I don't know if we can get a little zoom in on the overhead camera here for just a second on this. Let's see if I can.
Oh yeah, ours is ready.
I don't know how your pieces of Cremant are looking, but you can see ours is oozing all over the. Oh, that's a great shot. Thank you very much. Oh yeah. What is nice about this? So this is a mixed milk cheese. This is cow and goat, and what the cow's milk does, I believe, is it sweetens the cheese a little bit, and the goat's milk adds the tang. So we often talk about this as a entry-level goat cheese because the cow's milk has softened it a little bit. But even this cheese can get pretty ripe. We're in a pretty good state here. In fact, this is in a state that I just love it. Give us some more background here, and I'll cut a piece.
Amazing. So this is a cheese coming to us from Vermont Creamery in Websterville, Vermont, which is kind of central North Vermont. And I wanted to make sure to get a bloomy rind goat cheese. The bloomy rind is that white rind again, nice and fluffy, but also something from Vermont Creamery because they have really helped move the artisanal cheese movement forward in this country. We are like in a great business right now because so many new cheeses are coming out in the US, and so we have a lot of cool things to work with. So it was founded by Allison Hooper and Bob Reese, and you'll see a picture right here, in 1984. And so they knew each other through the Vermont farming scene. So back in the 80s, Bob was looking for a fresh goat cheese because he was helping a French chef find goat cheese for this dinner he was putting on.
In New York City, correct?
In Vermont.
Oh, in Vermont. Okay.
So this French chef needed fresh goat cheese for the dinner. So Bob reached out to Allison because he knew Allison because they were both in the farming world in Vermont, and he knew that she had worked at a farm in France earlier in 1980 and learned how to make goat cheese because he couldn't find it anywhere. There were no cheesemakers making fresh goat cheeses. There was nothing in the supermarkets, which is for me kind of hard to even like conceptualize because I think of fresh goat cheese just in the grocery store all the time. So anyway, Bob approached Allison to make this fresh goat cheese. She made it. It was a huge success. And then they had a conversation and decided to go into business together. So they started by making fresh goat cheese and creme fraiche, which at the time in the early 80s was really foreign to people. And they really had to fight to get people to even try it. Allison was the one who made the cheeses. Bob kind of reached out and did more of the business side. So Allison is known as part of this group called the Goat Ladies of the 80s. They're this group of women who actually started making fresh goat cheese at different parts of the country, kind of around the same time in the 80s, and started selling it at farmers markets and reaching out to their neighbors, asking them to try the fresh goat cheese, which was just like a crazy thought to many Americans at the time because it just wasn't available. So fast forward, now they've been able to push forward this artisanal cheese movement from just these few women, and we see fresh goat cheese everywhere. Creme fraiche is also something we see in grocery stores all over the place. So what these women, including Allison Hooper, did were to sort of get the American public thinking about what cheese could be, thinking about what it was like to get cheeses from small farmers instead of just giant, industrial made cheese. They got used to changes of season and how the goat cheese might taste a little bit different in the spring than it did in the fall. And people started being okay with that because the flavor was so awesome. So the Goat Ladies of the 80s and Vermont Creamery, Allison Hooper and Bob Reese, really started the engine of
artisanal cheesemaking?
artisanal cheesemaking and small producers in this country, which continues today, and we just see it growing, which is so fun for us. So that is kind of part of our history. It's very new compared to this thousands of years of cheese history in Europe, but that kind of makes it even more fun because people can be crazy creative. There's no tradition to follow, at least in this country.
Do we have a couple of pictures, or should we taste first?
Oh no, you already saw Bob and Allison.
Oh my God, I was paying attention to
you were trying to make me a bite.
I was thinking about.
It's amazing having a professional cheesemonger as a father. He feeds you all the time. It's great.
Sorry.
So Dad, what are you tasting? What do you think of Vermont? What do you want to pair?
So, in this fairly ripe state, we've got there is a nice funkiness. Now that's not everybody's bag, but that's the funkiness of a bloomy rinded cheese moving right along. Just a sidebar on bloomy rinded cheeses, Bries, that rind can be extremely strong sometimes. You actually almost get a sort of an ammoniated quality to it. That's a mark that the cheese is right on the edge. Some people like it, can take it, but I'm glad that it's not present in this at all. I think most of the samples that we sent out were also in very good shape. So I'm hoping you also have this nice goopy mess in front of you and are enjoying that one. Not super intense, but I think a very good example of that sort of acidity of a blooming rinded cheese.
And a goat cheese.
And a goat cheese. And over to you.
I was just wanted to say that Cremant is one of my favorite cheeses to have with jam. So if you have any of V Smiley in front of you, or if you have any jam at all, I recommend just throwing it on Cremant. It's so good. And do you want to talk a little bit about pairings?
Oh yeah. So classic wine pairings are. This is 100% Chenin Blanc, and one of the things that we can do to be pretty safe with pairing a specific cheese with a specific wine is you get the wine and the cheese from the same area. So if you think think of this as being in the French tradition, the Loire Valley, Chenin Blanc is a standard for that, and that's going to be a pretty good bet. And boy, is it a good bet tonight. We have this nice one that we're sipping on right here. And one of the nice things about a white wine, typically, that acidity helps clear the palate. The temperature, white wines being usually served chilled somewhat, refresh the palate nicely, and you're ready for the second or third bite or fourth bite and so on.
Yeah, I also would say the bubbly is great with this. So do some questions. Kevin, do we have any questions here?
We do. Number one question is, how do we store cheese, specifically the leftovers from this session, and how long will they stay good in the fridge? And what are signs that they might have gone bad?
Yes. So we recommend storing your cheese in the fridge, away from any sort of blowing things. So if you have a drawer in your fridge, putting it in there. And if you can, we recommend you using the cheese paper that it came in. What I like to do is sort of take this and almost crumple it around the cheese. Can we have an overhead shot? I just want to show this really quickly. So if you have a cheese like our Gruyere here, I kind of put it back in the cheese paper. You can see it's sort of already used. There's a little tape on it, and you can sort of fold it around like this, and then I just throw a rubber band around it, and that's it. The reason this cheese paper is good is because it's a little bit perforated, and since cheese likes a little bit of airflow, that we recommend putting it in this cheese. If your cheese paper is a complete mess, totally ripped, there was too much tape on it, too hard to take apart, that is totally fine. Wax paper is good. Any other favorite ways?
Let's see. Yeah, wax paper. I'm often buying wax paper or the wax sandwich bags as a stand-in, and but there's so much airflow through those that I'll put some plastic wrap around the outside.
But loosely.
Pretty loosely, yeah.
Yeah.
Just to get to plastic wrap for a moment, we use plastic wrap in the shop on the working pieces. And this is mostly to be able to display the cheese so people can see it. But it does impart a flavor we find on the cheese. So that's an unfortunate thing. It does a good job of holding the moisture in the cheese, but it imparts a flavor that we find not attractive.
Yeah.
And so often you have to be ready to sacrifice maybe a bit of your cheese over time.
Yeah, when we cut for all the cheese boxes, for example, or for any customer, we always clean the face with a cheese plane first so that you don't get this kind of plasticky taste. But then you lose a little bit of cheese. So that's why we recommend the wax paper or the cheese paper is best if you can sort of crunch it around your pieces. And in terms of how long, I would say harder cheeses can last,
Months.
we like you to eat it within about 10 days so that it doesn't get too dried out in your fridge. Soft cheeses sometimes can get a little dried out a little faster, so maybe a week on those. This very gloopy Cremant that we were just talking about, I might just put it in a little Tupperware container and take it out tomorrow for dinner and the next day, just to keep it moving, since it's definitely in its peak right now.
But also, speaking about cheeses and storage, one of the problems is that we've been trained to refrigerate everything immediately, and that buries flavors in cheese. So that's why we had recommended that everybody take them out well ahead of our session tonight. Similarly, if you end up with some cheeses like these small pieces here, I say leave them on the counter. Then they'll get eaten. Then you'll have little nibbles any time of day and they're ready for you. As opposed to, you're hungry, you come down to the fridge, there's that little nibble of Gruyere, you pull it out, it's cold. It's fine, but you're missing some of the delicious part of it. So I say, don't be afraid of leaving this stuff out in the corner. It's pretty tough.
Yeah, that is true. I did say store it in the fridge, but that's...
I'm thinking of stuff that you are going to get through.
Yeah,
yes.
Pretty quickly. At my parents' house, there's always little bits of cheese just hanging out on the counter, which when I'm there for breakfast is amazing. Just throw that thing into eggs.
The ideal storage for cheese is the root cellars that none of us have anymore. You want a fairly high humidity and about a 50-degree, 48 to 50-degree temperature, and
yeah, perfect for cheese, perfect for wine.
Yeah. And a little bit of mold growing on the edge. You just take the tip of your knife, pull it out, and off you go.
If the mold is black or red or seems a little sketchy to you, then, feel free to call it a day on that cheese. But if it's just a little blue mold, we tend to just cut it right off because...
And don't forget, we'll get to a blue cheese, which you pay a lot of money for that blue.
So true.
All right.
Anything else, Kevin? Or we can always go on to the next one.
No, I think that's good. We're coming up on the 8 o'clock hour, and I know we had talked about doing this is feedback I got from being part of longer Zooms, is that it's nice to have a little bit of a break, let everyone take a breather. So maybe we take 5 and come back around 8:05.
Perfect.
Cool.
Great. We'll do that.
Okay. Thank you, everyone. We'll be back in 5 minutes.
All right. Should we step away for a moment?
right, we're back to 8:05. Peter and Kiri, do we have you?
Yes, we're
Yes.
on. We're ready to go.
Great. Welcome back, everyone. Go ahead.
All right. So just in that break, Kiri and I were having a little bit of a dispute about the white wine that I loved, the Chenin with the Cremant, and she was not a fan of the flavors
Okay.
that came up.
I want to say that I thought it was good. I just didn't think it was as great as I had remembered from drinking in the past. It could be our piece of cheese. It could be the wine a little different. It could totally be me. I thought it tasted a little bit like banana. Dad didn't taste that at all. So as we were said earlier, taste is so personal that what you taste is right. So Dad loved that pairing. I wasn't crazy about it. We're both right, even though we're going to argue about this after we're done here, because not important. Everyone's right.
We're a little bit twisted in that direction.
Okay, so we are moving on to Wildeweide. It is a Gouda. Do you want to tell us a little bit about Wildeweide?
So another of the great cheese types in the world. Gouda is made all over the place. Of course, Holland is so famous for it. I have Amsterdam high on my travel list. I have never been there, and I can't wait to go. Goudas are what are called pressed uncooked cheeses, as opposed to the big Alpines de Gruyere, which was a pressed cooked cheese. Goudas are just pressed cheeses. So they're putting these cheeses under heavy pressure to get that dense texture. They are typically coated in wax. You'll typically see Goudas coated in wax, and that was a development. Maybe, I don't know if you can have the history on that. I don't want to get into some place that I'm not that.
Well, I can definitely get into that later. The waxing on the Wildeweide though is a very high-tech plastic these days that allows more breathing, like we were talking about with the Clothbound cheese. So the cheese can breathe a little more. There's a little more air exchange than there would be with just straight wax.
Goudas are often or typically are cow's milk, but you will find goat's milk Goudas and sheep's milk Goudas. There's a preponderance of cows in Holland, and cows produce a lot more milk than the other two animals, so they make a lot of cheese with it. Do we want to get right into a quick taste of this, or do you want to?
Well, I'd love you all to taste it, but I'm going to tell you a little bit more about Gouda. So definitely snack away, as with all these cheeses. Feel free to bounce around too if you want. So yeah, have a bite of Wildeweide, because I just wanted to point out two major characteristics of Gouda. So one is the sweetness in the flavor, and the second is the texture. That crunchy texture. And this is just a question we get a lot at the shop, is what is that texture? Most people think it's salt, which makes a ton of sense because it's white, it's in a salty cheese, and it's crumbly. Right. You can see in this picture, it's a really awesome picture of those little white marks is the crunch that I'm talking about, those little white specks. That is actually an amino acid called tyrosine. So this is part of cheese science that scientists know a little bit about it, but not a lot. It's really interesting how difficult it is to understand these procedures. So when the cheese is made, they add a starter culture to the milk, which can influence the way the cheese ages. So this particular bacteria makes the cheese a little bit sweeter. They use it in a lot of cheddars as well. And it also helps these crystals form. So what happens is, as the milk is heated up when they're making the cheese, proteins are kind of falling apart into various amino acids, one of them being tyrosine. So everyone's floating around a little bit. And then after the cheese is drained and pressed and molded and aged, the amino acids kind of start finding each other, and scientists aren't totally sure why this is. they start finding each other, tyrosine finds each other, and they clump together in crystal structures. So what you're eating is little crystals of amino acids. If you're really careful, and you can see the little guys floating around there, if you're really careful in your cheese and don't mind getting your hands dirty, you can actually kind of break your piece of veal de Vita. Can we get an overhead shot just of this? So you can almost take your piece like this, and if you want, work out one of these little nubbins here, and you can see, I don't know how well you can see that, but it's very round. So you can do this yourself for sure if you're willing to, get your hands in your cheese, which I think is a great idea, but whatever you want to do. So these are these little tyrosine crystals. If I were to eat this right now, it would be just a crunch. No taste, just a little added crunch. So I just wanted to put that, make sure you guys knew about that, because it's so obviously salt, but it's actually not. So it's very apparent in Goudas, but you can also find it in aged cheddars, in Gruyere.
Could I get another overhead on this one here?
So this is the Gruyere that Dad's holding up. Let
me get into it.
Yeah,
can we see that at
you
all?
can kind of see, you might be able to see this in your own piece as well, that there are little white flecks as well. That is also the tyrosine crystals.
So that was the Gruyere that I was just holding up there. Thanks, On.
Yeah.
I think of that as another factor that cheesemakers can play with. They can't stop it, but they can slow it down or speed it up. You'll find that, I think, in most aged cheeses.
But also with the starter culture, they are encouraging this crystallization to happen. With the starter culture is Lactobacillus helveticus.
Yeah.
And
the one in Gouda, oh, I see.
In Gouda and Cheddar. And so they're encouraging this to grow. But as Dad was saying, they can decide they want a lot of it or a little of it and try to control it. But again, it's cheese, so it's a little bit hard to actually control exactly what you're going to get.
Parmigiano Reggiano also has this in spades, the aged stuff. So you'll see that as well.
So true.
Yeah. So, did you have a taste of that? I forgot what.
Not yet,
okay.
but definitely have a taste. This veal de Vita is 1 year old Gouda, and it's definitely got a nice sharpness to it. It's made by a couple named Rose and Jan, and they are on this tiny island in a tiny lake in northern Holland called Zwanbergerpolder, and they are the only people who live there. They live there with their cows and their farm, and they make cheese. And we actually got to meet them last year in New York City when they came to visit. And one of the most amazing things was that Rose, she sings to the cheeses as she takes care of them as they're aging. So this whole group of cheesemongers sitting in this room, she gets up and sings to us. Everybody's crying and feeling the cheese love. It was very incredible. So that just shows how carefully they take care of every wheel of cheese. This is definitely a much smaller production Gouda than a lot of Goudas you can find, because they just don't have a lot of space, and it's just them.
How big is that wheel weight-wise, you think?
This wheel is 30 pounds. So another fun one to cut, not quite as fun as the Gruyere 80-pound wheel, but still fun. Still fun. You still feel pretty powerful after you're done. So what do you taste, Dad, and what do you want to pair?
So I think of this one as one of our more savory aged Goudas. It's got a little bit of I think, sort of a spiciness to it. I think of this, if I fed it to you and told you you were eating Parmigiano Reggiano, I might be able to fool you. In fact, I'll use this as a grated cheese on tomato sauces all the time, just as a slight change. I think this and other aged Goudas go very well with the acidity of tomato sauces. So give that a shot. Even those caramelly colored aged Goudas also would work well.
This pairing, this red wine,
right.
with this Gouda, so good.
a low tannin Zino Mavro, which is the grape. This is a Greek red. Has a nice level of fruit to it, and it's sort of a medium body, and it really goes very well with this thing.
Yeah.
Very happy with that pairing. But you can, when you taste that Gouda, I mean, if you're a beer drinker, I'm sure you think of those very rich Belgian ales going with this. That I am a particular fan of. If you're a whiskey drinker, I'm betting that you're wishing you're opening your whiskey right now with this thing. I think that somehow the carameliness and the spiciness go super well. I would think also with if you're doing the lowland Scotch whiskeys with some peat in here, I think it can go really well.
For sure.
All righty.
All right. Should see if there's any Gouda questions.
Oh, any Gouda questions?
Any Gouda questions, Kevin?
I don't actually have anything near the top that's specific to Gouda,
I can't quite
but I
hear.
do have one that is.
I'm missing that.
You have me now?
Sorry, Kevin, we're not getting you yet. We're still.
Okay.
All right, maybe we'll move on.
Yeah, let's keep going, and then we can come
We
back
can
to.
always cycle back.
Yeah,
for
we'll
sure.
cycle back to these questions.
Yeah.
Okay, so now I would love to go on to Oma. So we're reaching the like slightly more funky part of the evening. So Oma, what do we got? What do you got with Oma, Dad?
So Oma is our illustration of a category called washed rind cheeses. And let me see, could I get a bit of a zoom on here? What I'm looking to show you is that orangey color on the rind. And yeah, have a little sniff of that rind. Oh yeah, there's a little bit of that barnyard in there. This is very typical of these cheeses. We sent Oma around, cow's milk, by the way. We sent Oma around. Again, it's another one of our local cheesemakers in action. Kiri will tell you about them in a moment. But it illustrates the stinkiness just a bit. And so we didn't want to knock anybody down and scare everybody off. This is very old style. Its nickname is also Monastery-Style Cheeses. This is a technique that was developed. Now, I may be treading a little bit on myth, but typically by the monks in the Middle Ages, and the monks were great scientists and also never wasted anything. So they were the ones making beer. They were the ones with the cheeses. So what they did with the leftovers of beer making is they washed the cheeses with this, and it developed some molds that enhanced the flavors in cheeses very rapidly. So you could have a creamy cheese with a lot of flavor. So you weren't just left with some fresh cheese like cream cheese that barely had any flavor. You had something with some real punch. And you can imagine those monks trying this out with some of their famous liqueurs like maybe Benedictine and
delicious beer as well.
Right. Any sort of those herbal things. But back to you, Kiri.
So this particular wash rind cheese is Oma from Waitsfield, Vermont, from the Von Trapp farmstead. And so this one, as Dad said, is a nice example of wash rinds because you definitely get that classic scent, but it's not too strong. So I wanted to go just back a little bit about what a washed rind cheese is. So this is cheeses that they wash throughout its lifetime. Oma is an example of that, but also Gruyere is an example of that. You can kind of see a similarity in the color of rind. For example, the color of the Gruyere rind is a little more reddish as opposed to the Cheddar rind, which is a little bit more yellow. So Oma, as well as other wash rind cheeses, are washed in a salt brine, where that is where they're adding the beer, the whiskey, the Marc de Bourgogne, the cider, all to affect the rind smell as well as the flavor of the actual cheese. A lot of times with washed rind cheeses, as with other cheeses, it might smell really strong. There's polite ways to talk about the smell, and then there's true ways to talk about the smell. So polite ways, autumn, fresh hay.
A bit funky.
A bit funky, maybe more accurate, gym socks, locker room, barnyard, aka a little bit of manure in there, all maybe a little bit strong and a little bit weird, but I promise it tastes great. On this particular washed rind cheese, you're gonna get a little bit more of like a buttery taste. We definitely recommend you trying the rind here. This is a great cheese to test out the rind. For some of you, it's gonna be awesome. For some of you, it might be a little bit too strong, but definitely give it a little bit of a taste and see what you think. So this particular cheese was named for Sebastian Von Trapp, who is the main cheesemaker, his grandmother. She was the one who sort of inspired this farm, and she and her husband, Werner, bought it in the 1950s. Sebastian turned it into a creamery in 2009 because they weren't making enough money on dairy alone, which is what the original farm was. This is a really common story in Vermont. It's really hard to make money right now on just liquid milk. So a lot of people are turning to a value-added product, which in this case is cheese. So Sebastian decided that he wanted to name it for his grandmother, who inspired the farm that he has been able to take over and sort of move and develop to become this new cool thing. They have their own cows, so they only use milk from their own cows, which in the cheese world, that means it's a farmstead cheese. If you see farmstead cheese, most of the milk, if not all the milk, is from the farm itself where the cheese is also made. So any other flavor thoughts on this stat? I think washed rind cheeses are really hard to pair because they are pretty funky. What do you think?
Yeah, and I'm about to try the Chenin Blanc again.
I think you should try the sparkling.
Another note on, sorry?
I think you should try the sparkling. But...
Oh, yeah, we'll go back to sparkling just to be sure. But one thing to note about washed rind cheeses, yes, they can be quite aromatic. And so if it's a little bit too much for you, cut that rind away and get right into the paste. The paste is this is what we call the middle part. And it's typically much more gentle. In some ways, with a lot of washed rind cheese, you just have to get it past your nose, and then you'll be in Fat City.
Unless you love that smell, love that strong aroma, then just, give it a good sniff before you pop it in your mouth.
I think that, once again, dark beers work super well with this. Fruity reds can work well. This Zino Mavro from Greece is maybe has just a touch of too much tannin for it, but now we're splitting hairs. So I'll get off that high horse in a hurry. And you keep talking, Kiri, if you can. I'm just going to sip that champagne that you told me to try, and I'll report back in just
Yeah, should we check in with Kevin and see if...
Yeah, why don't you do that, and I'll just test the bubbly.
Any questions about wash rinds or Gouda?
Yeah, we actually have a question about the best temperature to eat all the cheeses at. Are there different temperature ranges that suit them best, similar to different wines?
Yeah, absolutely. I would say this is an easy answer just because all cheeses are best at room temperature. I always ask our customers that if they possibly can wait, keeping their cheeses out so they are room temperature will yield the best results in terms of flavor and texture. I also will say that, do I have patience for that? If I haven't thought ahead, no. So I eat it right out of the fridge, and that might not be ideal, but it's still really freaking good. But room temperature is definitely the ideal temperature for all cheese.
I've also, with some of these washed rinds, these smaller cheeses, I've been known to pop it in the microwave oven. And I told a cheesemaker that, and she was totally aghast. And I probably, she probably is never going to sell me her cheese again. But you have to be a little bit careful. You don't want to turn it into a soupy mess. But with just a few seconds, you can take, especially these washed rind things, a little stinky, you take it just above body temperature and you've got yourself a fantastic fondue. And you can be healthy, dip your veggies right in there. Potato chips.
Dad, your
salami.
vegetables, aka potatoes, fried potatoes. Let's like not fool the people.
Yeah. Anyway,
all the bread you can possibly take.
So room temperature is ideal for just about everything, except when we start getting into some of these little goopy beauties that you could turn into a nice little dip in a real hurry. With care. I'm talking about like 10 seconds in the microwave max.
Yeah. Any other questions?
Just one quick thing. The bubbly is delicious with this. So just to let you know.
Let's see.
Any other questions, Oma?
Yeah, a little question again about kind of all of the order of the cheeses, all the cheeses. What is the correct order for eating a selection of cheeses? And with that in mind, could you talk a little bit about why you chose this particular ordering tonight? Yeah,
absolutely. We generally try to go mild to strong. We kind of lifted away from that a little bit tonight just to, get a little bit of like a soft cheese in a little bit earlier. Maybe Veal de Vita should have gone before the Cremant, but we wanted to have a little bit more variation of texture as opposed to all the hard cheeses than all the soft cheeses. But when tasting cheese, it tends to be easiest if you go mild to strong. That being said, if you want to start, with your blue cheese because you're most excited about that, I think you should. If you want to zip around, do whatever you want, put jam on everything, use nothing, add a little Cremant on top of your Gruyere, like I'm for it. But technically mild to strong.
And I think this is where adding some condiments can sort of vary that sequence a little bit as well. Honey is one of the easiest things to pair with cheeses. We've got some jams, and that's where we're sending them along to you that have little honey in the background. So we're very confident that those that those are great in there. The idea of this also was to more highlight each individual cheese tonight as opposed to compose a board. So as Carrie's talking about, she might have rearranged it if she were doing a more serious cheese board of, say, 3 cheeses. On the other hand, at a big party, we'll have 10, 15 cheeses and, people just go at what they like. And we love that too. I think that if we were talking dessert, what would you sort of take after salad or?
I think this Cremant would be an awesome dessert cheese, especially if you have a little jam or honey on the side. The Roquefort, which is the last cheese we're going to get to, awesome with chocolate. So when it comes to after dinner, I am reaching more for the soft cheeses, I think, because they remind me of cheesecake and
ice cream
and
yep.
goopy delicious things like that.
Anything else, Kevin, before we jump?
Just one more here. We have, if I'm, say, going to select a cheese at the store and I want to try something new, what would you recommend that we look for or ask about in that situation?
Go ahead.
Well, this is such a fun question for us. We are so happy to introduce people to new things because we're excited about all the things. We would probably ask you if there's anything in particular you're looking for in terms of texture, hard or soft. So if you know that, that's a great start. You can also, if you have a shop like ours near you, go up to your favorite cheesemonger and say, what do you like today? Or I love cheddar and I want to try something a little different. We love that stuff. It is so fun for us to have just such an open-ended question. Texture is a great way to narrow things down for us, though. So if you know you want hard or soft or something in between, that's super helpful to us. Or if you want to tell us about what you like, that's also very helpful. But even if you don't have that much information, we can work with it.
And the other thing we typically are asking about, we try to avoid feeding you things that you hate. We don't want to challenge you that much. But we do love the person who thinks he's pretty tough and could really take it. And we try to make sure we have something in the case for that person as well, to see if we can knock him back on his heels a little bit. And there are cheeses that can do that. We happen to have a little sheep milk from Sardinia at the moment that is so gamey. Every cheesemonger in the shop has retreated from it. So that's pretty.
So
pretty
sometimes
amazing.
it's just too much for all of us. But even if you love, very mild cheeses and still want to try something new, we love to work with that too.
But so I think it comes back to hopefully you can find a cheese shop that has some cheesemongers in it who really care about what they're feeding you and want to give you a new experience. And so that's the love of the job that we have, and we want to share that. So we typically really will almost pry into your private life to get there, but we've got a good enough selection that hopefully we'll find something new.
Yeah. So that being said, we hope that everyone is ready to try their blue cheese.
Mm-hmm.
So we have Roquefort. Dad, you want to give us a little Roquefort intro here?
Yeah.
Tell us what it is.
So this is that other great category that is self-evident, a blue cheese category. So Roquefort being what we call the queen of the blues. Everybody knows Stilton. Everybody knows Roquefort. Stilton is British. Roquefort is French. Roquefort is, so I would have been happy to use either one to illustrate, but what's fun about Roquefort is that it's a sheep milk cheese, which often people don't know, and it must be sheep milk to be Roquefort. And then Kiri will give you some of the other requirements of Roquefort. But I think we know it as, or many people know it as a Roquefort, as a dressing, and I think it got to be in that form because it can be very strong. The version that you have is not so intense. I think this one is carefully made cheese, and we try to get it in this slightly younger stage so that it doesn't, it's the nuances and the sweetness in this thing are just outstanding. But it's still got plenty to say for itself.
Yeah. So Roquefort has a very long history. So this is a French blue cheese, as Dad said. And so first, the legend history. So hundreds of years ago, a young man was eating his lunch of bread and cheese in the mouth of a cave, and he saw a beautiful woman in the distance. So he throws his lunch into the corner of the cave and goes running after her, forgetting completely about the food. And then he goes back a month later, because that's what you do in the olden times. And he finds his lunch, and it's a little blue, and the bread is a little bit moldy, and the cheese is a little bit moldy, but you're not going to waste that because it's food. And so he ate it, and it was zippy and delicious, and Roquefort was born via man in cave. So that's the legend. I think it's true. I choose to believe it. But if you're looking for hard fact, one of the first times we heard about Roquefort, like actually for sure Roquefort, is from a decree in 1411 by Charles VI, I believe. And he was writing a decree saying Roquefort must come from this specific spot called Roquefort-sur-Soulzon. And he wanted to make sure.
Anybody French.
I think I did a great job, Dad.
Sorry, please proceed.
Jeez. So he wanted to make sure it came from this area because this particular area of France didn't have as fertile ground as other areas of France. So they weren't able to have as many crops to trade with other parts of France and Europe. So Charles wanted to give them a very specific product to be able to trade around France and make some money for the region. So he decided Roquefort had to come from this area. And so that is one of the earliest examples of what we call protected designation of origin, or PDO cheese. You will probably have heard of that before, thrown around with like Parmigiano Reggiano. These are protected names that you can only use if you have very specific guidelines, or you follow very specific guidelines and are from a very specific place. Some PDOs for cheeses are a little bit looser, a little bit easier to get around. Roquefort is not. I have a list here of a few things that they require. So specific cow breed, how long the curd develops as the cheese is being made, how long and at what temperature the cheese is being aged, and how it's salted, how it's wrapped. Like, it has to be wrapped in this tin foil wrapping. That is a requirement of the PDO. You can't call it Roquefort if it doesn't have this foil wrap. So that's just some of the PDO requirements. There are more, I just didn't write them down. So that means that in all of France, in all the world, there are 7 producers of the PDO Roquefort. But 7 producers create 7,000 tons of Roquefort. So we get ours from this guy named Gabriel Coulet, and he makes wonderful Roquefort, definitely much smaller production, but some of these other guys are huge. And when I was looking up, I was trying to picture 7,000 tons. And so I was looking it up on Google, and I found out that the Christ the Redeemer statue above Rio de Janeiro is about 7,000 tons. So picture the statue just made of Roquefort. And that's how much Roquefort is made every year. So I thought that was a really good visual, because 7,000 tons, what does that even mean? It means a lot of blue cheese, even though there's only these 7 producers. So one more thing I wanted to say about blue in general is that often we think that blue is injected into the cheese. You can see these lines on the blue cheese here, so it almost looks like something has been pushed in and injected into the paste. Actually, what happens is the mold is added to the milk as soon as the cheese is being made. What the lines are is they poke the cheeses with wooden dowels, metal dowels, things like that, to aerate the cheese. This will allow the mold to develop because it only develops with air. Since this is Roquefort, we obviously have a specific number of holes, and that is 40. So you can only poke the wheel 40 times to get the blue to start to develop. So Roquefort, very specific blue cheese, long history, really special sheep milk. So Dad, what do you taste? And what do you like to pair with blue?
Well, we get a little salty kick on that. We get a little sweetness. There's a little funky. I think this really does well with a dessert wine. We don't have one of those. I was just sort of tasting through our flights to sort of fish around for...
Dad tasting through the flights again.
Yeah. I haven't gotten to the orange wine. I think that's going to be the winner in our little crew here. I was thinking that often that I would cycle back to the bubbles to finish us off.
That's what I was thinking as well.
But I want a little more fruit in the wine than the bubbles. The bubbles are a little bit too lean for that. So what I did was I put a little jam in there, put it on the cracker, had my bubbles, and now I'm a happy guy. So play around with it for sure.
So in terms of strength, what would you say? How would you say Roquefort is in the blue cheese world?
I think that if we go from 1 to weak, 10 to strong, I'm putting Roquefort at about a 7. Would you say?
I would say this. I would go more to 6.
Okay, on this particular wheel.
Yeah, it's got a really nice hay quality, but there's also a sweet butter note to it that I think balances the slightly funkier quality, that like hay quality, really nicely. So that's why I put it around a 6, but 7, I guess, is right too.
Blue cheeses can use a variety of molds, but the Penicillin Roqueforti, that is the key for Roquefort, is used in, I'd say, huge majority of blue cheeses.
Like 90% or something like that.
And I think it's also very interesting if you left your a plain cheese near a blue cheese in your drawer, and the molds from the Roquefort will move over to the cheese, and you'll begin to get some of the Roquefort going on in the other cheeses as well.
Yeah, in the case behind us, there's no blue cheese. We separate it to its own case because it jumps too easily.
Having said that as well, if you taste some of the blue-green molds on a cheese that you've left too long in your drawer and it hasn't been near a blue cheese, it's just the stuff floating around the air, you'll barely taste it. So it's very clear that the mold itself, the Roquefort, adds a real interesting and delicious kick, and that's why they use it.
Yeah, blue cheese is also great with honey, especially if you're a little unsure about blue. It's a really nice sort of backdrop to the blue if you want to taste it, but it's a little overwhelming. Some blue cheese on a piece of bread, little drizzle of honey or jam, and you're good to go.
Yeah, so that then leads us to the dessert wine as a easy pairing. I'm wondering about the whiskey itself, what the whiskey would have to be. Would you want a bourbon on this one or something like that, as opposed to a leaner?
Maybe.
So I'm going to just try this this orange wine again just to see what's happening.
Yeah, but
I'll report back.
Great, thanks, Dad. So this is our crowd of cheeses. We hope that you'll go back around, snack, try the jam on all the different things. Let us know what you think of the cheese. And if you come up with any cool pairings in terms of wine or tea or beer, whiskey, orange juice. I wouldn't recommend that. I wouldn't recommend that. I was trying to be creative. No, but maybe cider. Yeah, so we're all set. Kevin, do we have any specific questions?
I think that the one that would be top of mind for most folks at this point is, we just tasted through 6 very interesting cheeses. Thank you so much for putting together those tasting packs. That was phenomenal. I'm trying to eat with one hand and mouse with the other here. Can you say, if we were to walk into your store tomorrow, what would we expect to pay on a per pound basis for these 6 cheeses?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we have, I would say most of our stuff is mid-20s per pound. We have things, we try to cap it at 40, even if the cheese should be more expensive than that. We have a few seasonal cheeses that move beyond that are just around this time of year, very special, very limited. But we have things that are $14 a pound, and then we have, a big crowd in 25 to 30, and then the higher end as well. But we always say that if you have a more expensive cheese you love, we are happy to cut you a small piece, whatever can work for you in your budget. Or, if you want to go crazy, we cut you a huge piece. But we're also happy if you're like, I want to spend $10 today. We can absolutely help you do that, and we're here to do that for you.
I think that's one of the important things to realize, that in a shop like ours, we feel it's an easily understood pricing range to price by the pound, but we don't cut by the pound. We can cut by the pound, we can cut by the 2 pound, but we're cutting a lot of quarter pounds. We're cutting, what you saw here was between a quarter and 1/8 was typically the size. And you can see how satisfying this array was.
We're probably, for 4 people, I'm probably taking home, 3 different cheeses at about 1/3 of a pound each if I'm going to have a cheese board with some friends.
And you'd maybe have some leftovers still from that.
Yeah, I would probably have a few leftovers, but sometimes people are really hungry and they just fly through everything.
But this leads me to my cheese diet regimen. I think when you have a cheese like one of these, and you take a quarter pound of this and you go through it, you'll be happy. The flavors will have been interesting. You'll be full. You'll have a nice salad with it, or some veggies or something like that, and a few glasses of wine or something, or a beer.
Yeah.
And you will be satisfied.
Yeah, Dad doesn't bring lunch to the shop because he believes in his cheese diet. So he gets hungry throughout the day and just eats cheese throughout the day.
So
because it's a cheese diet.
Yeah, because who's ever been satisfied with a quarter pound of steak? I mean, give me a break. So anyway, so that's my, I stay nice and lean and mean that way. And moving right along, should we go to some other questions? Kevin, anything else we should?
Yeah, I think that at this point we're close to the breakout rooms for the remainder of the event. So I would love to see if you two had any parting thoughts. Typically, you know, a lot of folks will bug out at this point. So if you have anything you'd like to leave as a lasting remark, this would be the chance to make it.
Can I go first?
Of course.
Okay. I'm hoping that a lot of you saw my email address. I'm happy to take any questions. We're happy to ship to you as well.
Holiday stuff?
Know that I'm a little bit slow on my email. So if I don't respond right away, it isn't because I haven't received it. It's just because I'm out on the cheese counter, but I will get to you. And I have a very, very good crew around me who are very efficient. And so by all means, contact us with questions, grand and minute. And we're happy to deal with them.
I'll make sure that he is checking his email for you guys, for sure.
And the second thing is, you know, please visit your local small cheese shop and do not be intimidated. I'm hoping that the cheesemongers behind those counters are friendly and eager to serve you as opposed to intimidate you. But you can always call us as well with some specific questions, and we're happy to answer them.
Mm-hmm. Feel free to ask for Peter or Kiri, and definitely talk you through some fun things. And just, you know, whatever you like is right.
Mm-hmm. Great.
That's always true with cheese.
Thank you very much, everybody.
That's great. Yeah, and just a parting comment from me. I was seeing a few questions roll in.
I've lost you again, Kevin. Hang on one second.
Okay.
I've lost Kevin again.
Usually when people lose me, they're somewhat excited. Just a minute, folks, while we get them connected back in.
We're back.
You're back? Great.
Thank you.
Well, I just wanted to make the comment as well, because there were some questions coming in the chat that about your name versus the MIT Endicott House, and is the Endicott House slang for your shop? So I just wanted to separate because it was a little bit confusing, I know. So Peter and Kiri Endicott are the owners at the Cheese Shop of Salem in Salem, Massachusetts.
That's correct.
That's right. The MIT Endicott House. The MIT Endicott House is shares a name due to family history, but the MIT Endicott House is an establishment in Dedham, Massachusetts, that is open for MIT and non-MIT events. It's actually run as a hotel and event center, and now they're moving to virtual events. So Kiri and Peter have taken their event to the MIT Endicott House, and even though it looks like they're standing in their shop, they're actually standing in front of a green screen that is showing their shop behind them, but all of the great work on the cameras was done by the MIT Endicott House to help shoot this event. So they are two separate entities with kind of a common name and common history. Very interestingly, very MIT. I loved it. You guys are great. You had great.
Very well put, Kevin. Thank you.
And
everyone here is amazing and super helpful with all the cameras and the very cool background. And
it's really well done. Way better than the AV that I've been able to work out in the past. So folks, this is the conclusion of kind of the formal seminar portion. We're now going to move to the breakout rooms, where you'll be randomly assigned to a room with about 5 other folks. It's a great time to just relax, meet some people that you wouldn't otherwise. You know, it's a kind of a tough time to meet people right now. So I think this is a great way to network. And we'll come back at, we'll say, 5 minutes after 9 o'clock Eastern time. So that's about 15 minutes from right now. One lucky room will get Peter and Kiri put in with them as well. So if you have any lingering questions, go for it. So I'm going to make that switch right now. And for those of you who choose not to join the breakouts, thank you so much for joining, and look forward to seeing you again at a future event. Okay. I'm going to assign these now.
Thank you.
All right, we'll see you all again in 15 minutes.